I could actually check for a charging station, I guess. Okay. Oh, we're being live streamed. Okay.
Oh, okay.
Okay.
Green is
All right.
there somewhere.
You can stop the chit chat. Is Maureen here or is we're still waiting?
It's coming in.
I
Okay.
am, but I'm having trouble with my video, but I'm here.
Okay, no problem. Thanks, Maureen, for joining us. Okay, sorry for the, we had some technical difficulties.
This meeting is being recorded.
That's a lot of notices about being recorded. Okay, welcome everybody. This is the Housing Advisory Committee, Monday, June 27th. We'll introduce the agenda. We did have a late change in that there was a date mix up. So Silas White was meant to be a delegation, so he wasn't able to make today. So we're hoping he can make our next meeting. So we'll determine that date at the end of the meeting and then get in touch with him. Was there anything else, Steph, added to the agenda? I think that was the only change. Anybody else have anything they want to add or change on the agenda? Oh, seeing none. Okay, could we move to adopt the agenda? Anybody put their hand up? Doesn't matter. Yeah, thank you, Fritz. I'll second. All in approval. Maureen, we'll just have to take your word for it. Jump in if you're a nay. How's that? I'll just assume positive unless you jump in. I don't know. Okay. Agenda approved. Adoption of the minutes. They were in the agenda. So oh yes, Ron. Oh, are you moving to adopt the? Oh, good. I thought you had something to say. Anybody have any comments about the minutes? Nope. Hearing none. Ron's moved. I'll second. Everybody in favor of approving the minutes? Fritz, yeah, okay. Maureen, I'll take that as a yes. And we have no public comments, I'm assuming. I don't think we have anybody public comments. Okay, perfect. So like say number 4 has been deleted, delegation. So we go on to number 5. So business arising from the minutes, the cluster housing guidelines report. So this is something Ron and Fritz and I have been working on over the last few weeks. So it's just in draft at the moment. So I was hoping today could be a little bit of a workshop just to look at what we did. Fritz sent some great comments just yesterday, so maybe we can look at both and just talk about what we think this report should, basically what should the final outcome of the report look like. And then I think I can probably take on kind of amalgamating our comments and Fritz's comments and make it into something. So yeah, if we want to have a look, maybe let's see. Can I share my screen, Steph? Does that work? Okay. Okay. Let me just get it.
Can I share my
I'm getting a little feedback. I don't know if that's, I'm not sure. Okay, that stopped. It's good. Nope, I'm definitely still getting a bit of feedback. Okay. Hopefully that won't last long.
Okay.
All right. So hopefully that's the right screen. Yeah. So this was the draft that mostly Ron and I came up with, and then Fritz's comments are over here. So I don't know if anybody, I guess Maureen, you're the only one who hasn't seen this, and Daniel, of course, if you have some comments, but maybe what we'll do is just go through them. So what we did at the beginning was a summary, sort of the purpose of the report, and we can maybe look at, maybe I'll just sort of go through kind of the high level, like bullet points, what we've had in the report, and then we can go into the details. So we had a summary at the beginning, so the purpose, the background, the definition of what we thought cluster zoning was, the benefits. I think we should address somehow how it relates to conservation development, and Fritz has done that in more detail, and then possible concerns. And then what we looked at was cluster zoning in other communities. So Ron did some great research and pulled these things together. So seeing, oh, that's a little annoying, seeing what the different, there was 5 different zonings that we found just for comparison and to look for research. And then other just some small items that didn't quite sort of fit into the table. And then I just sort of threw this in there if we wanted to do that. Fritz has taken more of a qualitative view. So I'm not attached either way if we think it's appropriate to kind of put some actual hard numbers to it, or like Fritz says, if it's kind of more qualitative and descriptive, we can discuss that. And then issues for discussion. I don't know if this has to be a big thing or if we just kind of bring them up as point form, but I think Fritz has sort of kind of touched on them as well. Is basically, acknowledging site servicing would have to be okay. What is the approval process? Is a development permit or not? Setbacks, because I think that might be one of the biggest issues, is reducing setbacks, especially if it's on kind of an existing lot. Parking, which I think is fair enough to be addressed. Design guidelines, if they should or not be there. And then location, by that I meant, is there some neighborhoods that it's appropriate or not appropriate? Is it, do we do a number in each neighborhood? Is it limited? Like those kinds of things. And then essentially I tried to come down to a recommendation. So maybe we can look at that at the end. We don't have to go into that detail now. So that was sort of our report. And then, so go back up to the beginning here. And then Fritz wrote some. So he addressed the OCP, which is great. So we can talk about how the OCP comes in here as well. And so I don't know, Fritz has written an amendment, made a recommendation to OCP amendment. So I'm not sure if that's where we want to go at this stage. We can talk about that. And different zoning. So he brought up distinguishing the cluster zoning in established single family neighborhoods, in subdivisions, in large rural parcels, new neighborhoods, and then paired with conservation development. So I think that's interesting to look at all those. And then he goes into detail about each of them. Background, I think he said was okay. And then we can discuss the definition between our two reports. Yeah, and then I think I would want to discuss a little bit more the distinction between one of the things that Fritz had said about like cluster zoning in a new neighborhood. I'm not sure how that's differentiated from conservation development, but probably Fritz, you could touch on that in a minute. And then benefits and concerns. And then, yeah, looking at maybe some of these individual ones. And is there, this matrix of hard numbers in terms of these different ones in established neighborhoods or the various different places. Okay, Fritz, do you want to speak at all to your notes? And
well, obviously I do, but
yeah.
I actually found it interesting that somehow by accident, Robyn, we thought that we also had to look at the cluster zoning in development, conservation development. Having said that, that whole concept has always been of huge interest to me for decades on Bowen, the whole introduction of amenity zoning. And, conservation development is an excellent example of that. So I think the only difference is, like, if you look at, first of all, maybe what I had about the OCP, right? Because the OCP actually does encourage clustering, but if you read it carefully, it's completely different from the clustering that we have in mind. That clustering says that you can divide a smaller lot if there would be density available. It gives the example, if you have a 10-acre lot and you would be able to do 5 2-acre lots, you could instead put 5 1-acre lots on half of it and the other half would be protected, and that can occur, but it's unlikely to occur, which means that there's no increase in density. Now, in theory, with the conservation development, an increase in density is not needed, so to speak. And from what I read in the original report, which was not particularly part of our mandate, is that it kind of says that it kind of ignores it almost. It kind of says it doesn't really, it's not very explicit about increasing density. I actually think that generally speaking, you need increased density as an incentive, otherwise nothing is going to happen anyway. I mean, the existing OCP is a prime example that nothing that's encouraged there has ever been able to be implemented anyway. So I think that the OCP has a definition of clustering that is just confusing because it has nothing to do. It's very remote from the clustering, let's say, that we propose maybe in existing neighborhoods. Mm-hmm. So then, maybe it can just be a small amendment, or council just decides to ignore it. But from how I read the OCP is that except for rental, affordable, or special needs housing, you cannot increase density to densify away from the cove. If any, it's the other way around. The OCP encourages you to transfer density from the rural areas towards the cove so you can build market housing there. It's completely out of date. However, a small amendment may be okay to deal with it, or it's just simply ignored, which is fine with me.
If I could interrupt, I think if we can find the references, we can put in what those parts of the OCP are. And I think I would argue that what we're discussing, it's a lot about diversity, but you could arguably call it affordable. I don't know if
Yeah,
because
no,
it's
I'm
going to
totally
be
with you there.
more affordable, relatively speaking. I guess I just wonder if we want to
Well,
go down the route of making an OCP amendment
No, but
recommendation.
I'm totally in favor of that. If we acknowledge that that creating more smaller units, a variety of smaller units, right? If that justifies increasing the island population and dealing with the housing issues, then I'm completely in favor of that. It's actually what I'm writing in this as well. You know what I mean?
Okay.
I think it's a good idea. Just make you aware of it, because then instead of avoiding it, it's clear that clustering, if it's conservation development or not, can actually has access to increased density, which is a huge tool for the municipality to implement the objectives. For me, it's a total no-brainer.
Okay.
So the only reason between conservation development is, if you read it careful, it has the primary principal objective is unique, because it says that the primary objective is to preserve and protect nature, right? And it's silent about what it needs to do that, like increase density. However, it would be so useful if that would be available, that creating nature, preserving nature, and providing the housing that Bowen needs go hand in hand, and it's acknowledged as the best way to go forward. So anyway, so then if I looked at the cluster zoning, then I thought, yeah, okay.
So before we move on, Fritz, because I want to get into that detail, I just want to maybe do a check-in with Daniel and Maureen and see what they think as to how this relates to the OCP, and do we need to include this in the report? Yeah. Maureen, maybe first, if you have thoughts. Yeah.
Sure. When we last discussed the conservation development policy, the definition of cluster development was one of the things that we sort of paused on a little, because the references in the OCP are to single-family homes in cluster development, and I wasn't sure whether that was whether we wanted that kind of restriction. But I think, Daniel, your response was that making the OCP revisions to the definition might be best made in the context of a specific application for cluster development. Am I remembering that correctly, Daniel?
Yeah, I think that's right. Like, I think the goal for this document would be like almost a roadmap for council and an applicant, and say, this is what the Housing Advisory Committee thinks is an appropriate, form. This works for clustered housing. There's examples elsewhere. And then likely somebody coming forward would have to have an OCP amendment, potentially, depending on where it is, but that's, potential, but it's part of their application.
Okay.
It's like, or the Housing Advisory Committee could recommend that, council do a OCP amendment. It's just, I know, just sort of timing wise, like, it's not happening this council term. It's a much bigger project.
Yeah, that's fine. Sure.
Yeah. Okay. Maureen, how do you feel that might be received by council, or is it as a standalone versus coming in with an application? Or do you have a sense of that?
I'm not sure it would make a difference. I do know that there are some members of the current council who would likely be opposed because of the density implications.
Right. Yeah. Okay. Okay, good. Well, let's sort of leave it in the discussion, because I think it's in the guidelines, because I think it's good to acknowledge it, and then maybe we can just say, like, an OCP amendment would likely be needed, and it could either be done, by council separately, or at the time of an application. But let's sort of maybe as a team kind of make that decision, because I think it could be, putting on the housing advisory chair hat, it could be a good recommendation if council passed that independently as a standalone, because then with the goal being to hopefully get applicants to apply for this zoning, having that OCP amendment already in place would be really encouraging and positive to know that they have a better chance of going through the rezoning process if that change has already been made. So maybe I can see your point, Fritz. Maybe that's a good idea just to make that recommendation. Whether they take us up on it is another thing. But yeah, okay. So I feel good about that. If we move on from the OCP, anybody have any other items? No. So Fritz, do you want to keep going? You looked at cluster at zoning and you broke it up into different areas.
Because if you really think about it, right, like something like evergreen or what happens on the island, right, is this completely different than adding clusters to existing single family neighborhoods. And I kind of come back to that example of the city of Vancouver, which I think is really, really clever. And I think we really have to understand why they came to that conclusion. Normally, the problem with existing neighborhoods is that people don't like the neighborhood to change. Maybe it could improve, but they don't really see that. They normally don't like the idea of change. So I think is really key about that is that what the city of Vancouver decided, which is kind of amazing that they did, they zoned all single family areas. Everything is RS1 and RS5 to allow for duplex, with secondary suites or lock-off suites. The key is that it uses the same floor space, the same maximum floor space as you are allowed with a single family home. So I think I explained before, we have one of these under construction. The total available square footage for a single family house is 5,600 square feet in that particular lot in Kerrisdale. And it is split a bit randomly. Like the main family has 50%, 2,800. The sister-in-law separate strata has 1,400, and each have a 700 square feet secondary suite. Now, what's so cool about it is that there the city actually doesn't allow detached homes like laneway houses. And the reason is that the whole concept is to maintain the tree canopy of the city of Vancouver and the kind of character of the landscaped lush neighborhoods. So the idea is that more people can live in the same amount of building massing, while, if you go back to conservation development, if you would apply that to existing neighborhoods, you would certainly say that this is a good idea. I think that if that's the general rule, then people say, oh, so the massing and the impact on the neighborhood is not different than a new single family home. But you have to watch a bit that in some areas of Bowen Island, people don't build to the maximum. Single family homes could be much larger. So what would come up, which I think is the best for Bowen anyway, is to control house size with the maximum floor space, because that gives the community council the ability to distribute additional square footage to implement specific community objectives. So so that's what I think is really, and then you can always, regulations can always change over time, but if you introduce something to an existing neighborhood and it has the least kind of impact and people are happy with it, then in my mind, that's the way to go. So that's why I think that establishing of neighborhoods, the more, like, there's no reason why you have to change setbacks. I think, there's just no reason for it. So
well, I wonder, setbacks. Yeah, sorry, go ahead.
I would use all the same setbacks. And then if an applicant, for instance, would want to do something differently, then maybe there's a vehicle that you can go through a development permit and do that. But if you can give peace to people, that's a good thing.
Well, yeah. I mean, so because one of the things I was hoping we could do, which is what I see in the cluster zonings from the other municipalities, is in fact kind of change. I not to say that you couldn't do what you're talking about. I think that's one avenue, but the other avenue is to actually change the form and have several smaller ones, say on one lot. And I think I think we have to at least acknowledge that setbacks might be altered to sort of facilitate that. And then I would think something like, because they definitely have height, something like the height could be a trade-off. So you're going to have smaller setbacks, but maybe you can only have a 1-story or 1.5-story volume, as opposed to, you know, the 9-meter height that we typically have. So I'd still like to see that included as an option. I like yours as well. And one of the things that also came up, I was chatting with somebody, kind of a light bulb went off, is, you know, on parts of Bowen, there are some very large houses, right? And so wouldn't it be interesting if a group of people could collectively purchase a large house and then subdivide it? And it could become possibly strata units, or I'm not sure exactly what that would mean, but use this zoning to say then create 3 or 4 suites in an existing very large house. I think that's an interesting opportunity as well, that should be at least acknowledged. So I think there's a few different ways to look at the zoning in an established single family neighborhood. That's how I'm looking at it. So I think the first one is Fritz's, which is basically stick to all existing zoning guidelines, right?
Well, I just want to be clear that you refer to that Fritz's, but it's really the city of Vancouver, and it's,
sure, that model. Yeah.
Because like as an architect, architects always like to do innovative stuff and come up with new ideas. I'm just saying that there, if you want to instigate a program and you want it to be successful and reduce the amount of opposition, then maybe this is a gentle way to start it. It has nothing to do with me being an architect myself.
No. And sorry, I didn't mean to refer. It was just more of a, you've brought it to the table. That's what I meant by Fritz's. So I think that idea, I agree. So following the existing guidelines, and that's something straight out. Maybe then more of the cluster model. I don't know how else to describe this quickly in the moment. Change of form, reduce setbacks, and reduce height, something like that. And then existing building broken into suites. That's kind of where I could see the zoning in an established single family neighborhood. And yeah, maybe it's, you know, the first one is pretty straightforward. And then the next, you know, other ones are more complicated or require more thought or more approvals. I don't know, but I'd like to see those included as options in single family neighborhoods. Does anybody else have any thoughts, Ron or Maureen?
Yeah, I think you have to set some criteria, like, you know, I mean, like if when council discusses this and if they try to figure out, you know, what's their criteria, like, you know, is it, how does it relate to an existing neighborhood? And, you know, I mean, there is like, I give you an example. If you start cutting in a lot of neighborhoods, there's no end to that, because then suddenly all these trees are exposed to wind and then neighbors have to cut and it goes on and on. Now, that is part of the existing kind of landscaped character of these neighborhoods. Now, if that's all, I mean, that's what people think about, you know, like it's living in nature. So that if that, I think it's some real goals have to be there. And then what is done is a result of that. It's not the other way around, you know? That's what I think.
So what do you mean? So like, I think of, for example, where, like, I'll just use my lot as an example. I live on a relatively flat lot. It's pretty square. I have very few trees already. I would think a lot like mine is an ideal one to potentially, not that I'm planning on it, but potentially, you know, use as a cluster zoning. So, you know, if the house was, you know, a wreck and could be torn down, and then you could put, I don't even know, 4 maybe smaller places on here. With a shared septic system in the middle. It would probably require some, you know, smaller setbacks on the sides, but it's a pretty private lot. I'm on a corner, you know, like all sorts of things. I think there probably are. I don't think it's like in every single lot qualifies, but there are some, you know, in different neighborhoods that I think would lend themselves really well to, you know, a more distributed building model.
Maybe that's maybe what it is, that one of them is more outright, and this is what you can do. You know what I mean? Like, and the nice thing about outright is that people, you know, we have so many people that actually stop projects simply because of the complexity of getting permits and getting something approved. And the amount of time and money that is spent on going through, you know, rezonings and development permits is just unreal. It's just like crazy. So if there could be an outright component to it, which would be something that is simply it's the most acceptable to people, then that's
Yeah.
good because people will just do that. Then if they have to go through a process and they have to negotiate with neighbors and they don't like to upset their neighbors and it goes on, then they're just not going to do it. I mean, that's the reality, you know? So I'm just saying is, I know you a lot because you went for a variance.
Oh yeah. Yeah.
I know as well. And I think that actually is a good example how corner lots are more suitable for you know, for two homes than the typical lot that's not a corner lot. This is true.
So
actually,
I think
what I thought at one time, I actually thought what the city of Vancouver should do is actually do corner lot zoning, because corner lots always have unique opportunities. It's true. You can easily have two garages, one from one street and one from the other, and people don't even notice it. You know, so
yeah, exactly. So yeah, I think it could be interesting. Again, going back to, and I appreciate that Daniel set out at the beginning, sort of the goal for this document would be to sort of be a roadmap for council and for applicants on their way to applying for a cluster zoning. So I'm thinking, it would be maybe more palatable. I'm just going to use that word, palatable for these first two, which is following the existing zoning guidelines. So essentially following all of those, you know, guidelines if you were just going to build a single family house, or potentially use an existing house, existing building broken into suites, because I feel like that's, although, you know, the density could be an issue, the form and character of the neighborhood would be totally preserved, I think. Whereas the one that's maybe more the cluster model, maybe that just requires simply more community consultation, more, you know, maybe there's another layer of approvals. I'm not quite sure what that would be, but maybe that just requires that extra layer because you would be potentially kind of altering that, the character of the neighborhood, and you'd really want to look at that on a sort of particular case by case basis, I would think, whether it fit in. So yeah. There's some thoughts on that one.
I think too, Robyn and Fritz, like the discussion you were having was good in terms of like what makes an appropriate lot, you know, in terms of clustering in a single family neighborhood. So some of the things you were saying, you know, it's like corner lots are good, flat lots are good, you know, more private lots are good, lots without large existing trees, or, you know, some way of capturing those, of saying like, okay, if you think you meet these criteria, these are good. Whereas if you have a, you know, very exposed lot with lots of large mature trees and a steeply sloping site, it's like, well, maybe that's not as appropriate.
Yeah, or it falls into one of these first two, whereas, okay, you can make one building that would be like a single family house, but it happens to be 2 or 3 suites or whatever it is, you know, strata units. So yeah, I think that's right. Okay, let's go on. If there's no more thoughts on that first one, you've got your next one's, Fritz. I just want to watch our time because I know we had a little bit of extra time with where's my agenda here, with Housing Advisory Committee. There we go. I know we had a bit of extra time because we didn't have Silas here, but I just don't want to run too late because we have got a couple of other things. So we should be 10:40. Okay, so if everyone's okay with kind of, oh no, that's not the right time because we started a bit late. 15 minutes work plan. If we go till, let's see, no, 10:30, we're supposed to start on the next thing. So let's try to do that. So we'll spend the next 20 minutes or so and get back on track at 10:30. Does that sound good? Okay, so the next one you went through, Fritz, was cluster zoning and subdivision. And this was the one.
We can probably kind of skip that, but you know,
okay.
What maybe just a few points is that if you would allow lot consolidation, that obviously would, and if you have you know, conservation development in mind, for instance, then that would be a good vehicle to protect more green space. Obviously, it would give more design potential. If you subdivide, then it's kind of almost the opposite. It may be good for creating value because you can create 2 smaller lots maybe, and that may be okay by changing the minimum lot size. But then generally speaking, that relates in more construction, you know, more clearing, more whatever, right? So it's a larger impact on the neighborhood. The end result may be quite acceptable. But anyway, so I thought maybe just to see how subdivision and lot consolidation relates to the clustering. And then the next one is cluster zoning on large rural parcels. And that's
so let me just jump in with the subdivision too. I think that it could be interesting to so if somebody's doing, I'm thinking of back to Grafton Lakes, right? That was quite a large, rezoning and subdivision and everything. And they included some sort of interesting, and I don't know if they're totally unique, but some interesting, smaller lots. I think they have sort of a live work building or, a work building, something like that. It could be interesting if there was a sort of somewhat larger subdivision that maybe they say, hey, we're going to include a couple of these cluster zonings as part of the mix to have diverse housing options. So they're going to do X number of single family houses, but maybe the cluster zoning comes in as part of the mix that they can add. So I think that there's an opportunity there.
Yeah, there is for sure. Yeah. Then the next one that I had was cluster zoning and large rural parcels. And you may remember it a long time ago, I kind of tried to do a sketch like how small a small home is on a large lot.
Yeah.
But then some of these lots, there may be restrictions because of the ALR or the island's trust requirements. But you could have really small lots, maybe between 2,000 and 4,000 square feet, that sit on a huge parcel and really maintain the rural character. One of the advantages is it's probably relatively easy to provide water and septic, because it's not in a small, dense area. And then cluster zoning in new neighborhoods, which of course is that you can say from, well, is that then conservation development or not? If it's not, then because that completely changes the game. And then obviously you can get a massive amount of small units onto a parcel. And so then and there's different ways of doing that. What I kind of like is that we, but the problem with all the zoning that has been kind of subdivision that has taken place since the Second World War is that neighborhoods all have the same lot sizes. You know what I mean? Like, because people are in a certain income level and the neighbors need to be as rich as they are, right? So if you look at typical zoning schedules, they have a minimum lot size and the whole neighborhood is done with the same minimum lot size. I think it would be nice for cluster zoning that it could even be a fairly traditional subdivision, but there would be a variety of lot sizes. I think that's huge. And then on each lot, large or small, you would allow cluster zoning, or maybe the only thing that's allowed is cluster zoning. So no single family, which I think is totally cool, because then a person or maybe a couple or a few friends or so, they maybe buy a lot and they buy a somewhat smaller one and divide it in 3 units or so, and another one may be much larger, but it automatically creates variety and diversity, which I think is already embedded in the subdivision.
I think it would be interesting to talk to a developer about that. And because when I'm thinking, I can see what you mean on the large rural parcels, I think, as to how that, because it's your example of like, I could build a 5,000 square foot house versus 5 1,000 square foot houses, right?
Okay.
That's kind of the one for large rural parcels. But in new neighborhoods, I'm just trying to go through the steps, like how would a cluster zoning, other than say being part of a mix of zoning, so you have, let's say there's 10 lots, you have 9 of them as single family, and then 1 of them's cluster to add that variety. I
don't know.
How is that? So how is that distinct from if we're offering a cluster zoning that just one of them is whatever we define as cluster zoning? Or I'm trying to think, if they're subdividing, why wouldn't they just be saying, oh, well, we're just gonna, make that cluster zoning, the whole thing cluster zoning, and there's gonna be like, 5 lots that are cluster zoning or whatever. I'm just trying to think what distinguishes, like, why do we need to distinguish this as a separate line item and a thing, like, because I don't want the report to be 20 pages. I'd like to be as concise as we can.
Oh, no, there's a big difference. No, like if you have rural parcels, they have to maintain a rural character. They have to be open, and a small part of it, like maybe 10% of the lot, can maybe be developed. If you go to cluster zoning in new neighborhoods, and think about the community lands, right? So maybe close to the cove, there's some areas where the trees go down anyway, and maybe the conservation development is not a focus in specific areas. Now you can create neighborhoods that are set up for cluster zoning. Now, if you want it to be accessible to different groups of people with different financial means, then what a variety of lot sizes does, it makes they're priced differently and they have all different potential. Now, it doesn't have to be like that, but what I like about it is that if you basically say there is no single family neighborhoods, why would you create more single family neighborhoods? I would just think, forget it. there will be neighborhoods that are only zoned cluster. And then all the advantages of what clusters have to provide, which Robyn, you kind of described with in your mind should also be feasible in existing neighborhoods, which may be true, but I'm saying if obviously if you have a new neighborhood and it's cluster zoned and people love building there and they look forward to seeing it, that's completely different than an existing neighborhood. So therefore, then you have to design the neighborhood that it allows for perfect clustering, and there is no end to clustering, so to speak. And that if private capital, if people that want to do something can deliver that in a smaller scale or a larger scale, then I think it's a great formula.
So I'm wondering, I mean, I understand everything that you're saying, but in terms of making recommendations for like a zoning guideline, maybe it could be a comment, but it's not a separate item, right? Like it's applying the cluster zoning that we're recommending to new neighborhoods.
Well, that's a simplification. I mean, if you like that, that's fine. But I don't really see it like that. I think that in the community lands, for instance, if you set up a neighborhood for cluster zoning, would you do everything the same as in an existing neighborhood? No freaking way you would. Well, I mean, why would you put in all these same size, regular, standard single-family lots? You just wouldn't. You know, you would have parcels, right? And these parcels, then you can say, well, what is the difference if I have a parcel, if I allow cluster zoning, or allow duplex or townhouses or whatever? Well, the cluster zoning would allow all of those on a lot. And the distinction between them is just building code. Like the whole idea that something is zoned townhouse and you only get townhouses, why? You know, I just don't get it. Like, you know, you don't have to choose. You just and for instance, for the end result that you would want, if you say, from, you know, look, you can have a maximum house size. I wrote it in here, just testing some things. Let's say, you know, your maximum house size can actually be fairly generous. You say it maybe, whatever, 2,400 square feet, right? And the smallest one is 600 square feet. But you say the average has to be 1,200. Well, there you go, right? So now the average actually forces you to come up with a formula, you know? So then it automatically becomes a variety of different sizes of homes, you know, that tend to have, you know, I think it's just like, I find that if you set something up and you let it unfold and you have some rules in place that encourage that, then it's going to work.
Yeah. And you know what just occurred to me, and I wrote it down there as you were speaking. I think I get it now. It would be an interesting alternative to an individual comprehensive development rezoning, because I think that's pretty much what the major rezonings usually are. Daniel, correct me if I'm wrong, but usually it's a major thing. It's a, you know, there's tons of community consultation, all this stuff. Not to say that there wouldn't be some in this as well, but you know, they're basically, it's a completely custom thing that they're writing their own ticket and trying to figure it out. Also, whereas I think what you're saying is, hey, if there's a more, you know, they could just use this zoning, like this zoning, apply it to their area, you know, in individual lots, and it's a little clearer what they're aiming for, rather than completely having to make it up each and every time, if appropriate. I'm going to go back to like Daniel Maureen in a minute, but go ahead, Fritz, finish your thought.
This far, like this far, it's all set up for big developers to do big projects. But what I'm saying is that if you have cluster zoning and you lay out a new neighborhood and it allows smaller groups of people, smaller developers to respond, right? That's the difference. Like, you know, if you look at Evergreen, that is a ton of money upfront and patience and whatever, right? And the same for Malcolm Creek, all these developments. But if you set up a neighborhood that can actually attract smaller developers, individuals, whatever, to contribute, I mean, private capital is there. You just have to somehow make use of it. You know?
No, I'm with you on it. I'm thinking, for example, if let's say a neighborhood did have, you know, however many lots of cluster zoning, and that was done, they could sell it off to a smaller person. Like I'm thinking, you know, an entrepreneurial contractor on Bowen, could actually buy one, self-develop, whatever units, 3, 4, 5 units, and then sell them themselves. So they wouldn't be doing a massive rezoning and doing a CD development and all that stuff. They don't have it, but they could probably build a duplex or a triplex, and create that housing for Bowen, and it makes it more accessible to smaller developers. So I think I'm with you. I think I've got it. I just want to go to Daniel or Maureen if they had any thought, and Ron, of course, jump in if you have any thoughts too, but just what your thoughts are so far, and especially this new neighborhood one, if any. Maybe there's none. Ron, go ahead.
Maybe I'm missing something here, but I just don't understand what the connection is between cluster zoning and enabling small developers. I mean, if you're opening up a new neighborhood, fine. If you want to make it possible for small developers to take a piece of the action, then okay, I'm agreeing with that. But I don't understand how cluster zoning something for only cluster zone cluster is enables that.
Well, it's smaller homes, right? So, for instance, if you would buy a lot and you can buy, with some friends or so, right? And you can divide it in 2 or 3, whatever. That makes a difference. At the moment, purchasing land and like at the moment, if you look at it, people buy a lot and then there's a maximum square footage and it's all single family and it costs fortunes and leaves a lot of people out, right? But I'm kind of with you, Ron, what you're saying is that what is the difference? Well, that the intent of clusters is that it delivers more variety and more smaller homes and things like that. You can see it's just another development that somebody can do, which is true in a way.
Yeah. So how I'm wrapping my head around this is I see these as not, because I think this is where I was struggling a bit. I don't see these points here as separate zonings. I feel like this is how the zoning will make one recommendation for one cluster zoning, and then this is how we see them applying in these different scenarios. Does that make sense to everybody? That's kind of how I'm wrapping my head around this. So there'll be one recommendation for a cluster zoning, some guidelines, whatever that is, and then this is how we see it applying to this neighborhood and this circumstance. I think is that in line with kind of what you were thinking, Fritz, or does that make sense to you?
Yeah, I think you just have to be a bit careful with things like that are very prescriptive that don't necessarily.
So let's like jump down to that, because I think that we've only got a few minutes left. So let's jump into that, because I think we could probably flesh out this with paired to conservation development by email or something. Do we have like getting to the nitty gritty? What would our be like? What would our recommendations be? So I know you've divided them up, but I wonder if there's one, and maybe there is a couple of suggestions, like, hey, when it's a new subdivision, it could be this. But in general, is there sort of one recommendation that we can make for these kinds of guidelines? Yeah, I'm just trying to think, or is that asking too much?
Well, I think one thing is key is adding an average, because like the maximum, what does it really mean? There's I think the whole strength in the cluster zoning would be that it's set up to provide variety. So that like, for instance, like I'm always puzzled why there's a maximum on a attached secondary suite. It doesn't make any sense to me. Like, let people just decide how big it is. I guess 50% is the maximum. I don't know.
Sorry, 50% of what? Sorry,
No, I'm just saying is that like if you have a maximum house size, which seems to be a good size for, a family with 4 kids or so, and if you say, well, what is that? Is that 180 square meters or is it 200 square meters? Whatever, right? But in cluster zoning, there's no reason why that should be prohibited. But then if there's an average, then on a parcel, then maybe one of them is that higher number, because that's what people need.
So let's maybe talk about that. What is the minimum size if we're talking about cluster zoning, which is to encourage a variety of houses? And I mean, I think it's safe to say smaller houses, right? Like that's what we're aiming for here, because anybody can buy a lot and build a huge house, right? But if we're aiming for this, like, and and is there a minimum size? Maybe there's not, because if people want to build tiny houses, who are we to stop them? So maybe there isn't a minimum size, or like, I don't know what, Daniel, if there isn't a guideline for like, is there a minimum or like literally habitable minimum?
We don't
ever?
have a minimum. I
No,
think we say
okay.
a dwelling has to have, you know, sleeping area, kitchen, and a bathroom or
Okay.
something. So
Okay. So BIM guideline, sleeping, kitchen, bathroom. Okay, that makes sense. And then a maximum size. This will be the more interesting discussion. What do we think a maximum size, or does that vary depending on if it's in an established neighborhood or new neighborhood, or if it's cluster zoning? So for example, if we go back up to, where is it? The examples that we had. So they had maximum unit size. Some were 90. The ones in Maple Ridge were huge. I think they were more aimed at sort of townhouses and stuff. So they were quite large, 223 square meters, but Squamish is more like 90, which is kind of like our detached secondary suites. So I thought, you know, the 90 to 120, which I think is roughly what our detached secondary suites are, would be an interesting way to think about.
Okay,
Yeah.
so if you go into an existing neighborhood, right, and you add it as a permitted use, right, because there is an existing single family use. Now, one is that you make it all illegal, and if you build new, you have to do something different. But assuming that single family use would remain legal in these areas, then people can build a house that's huge. Now, then the question is, why do you need the maximum? You want to encourage people to if they build new, they probably buy that lot because they like to have enough space for single family use. Not necessarily, but that would be the case now for sure. And then they would have, they can strata title it, up to certain sizes. But like, what do you mean by maximum house size? Is this like, if you have a maximum house size on an existing lot, and now somebody rebuilds, then they suddenly have a maximum house size that is much smaller? Or do you say from now, it doesn't matter how they divide it? For example, if you can build 6,000 square feet, you could do 2,000 or 3,000. Now, is that then better than one of 6? You could start a title it like that in 2, and they each can have a secondary suite. But the numbers are high. You can build houses here that are fairly large.
Yeah, and I think it's just more of a, what are we trying to encourage with this cluster zoning? Like in my mind, it was sort of aiming to build a variety of smaller housing types. So not, because again, if somebody's got the money, they're just going to go buy a lot and build a single family house, if they've got $1.5 million these days or whatever, right? So I think the idea is this cluster zoning is to encourage the creation of like smaller units, variety of units, duplexes, triplexes, like, all of those kinds of things. So I don't know. I would like to say that there's some kind of maximum, like maybe Daniel, what other zonings, like I remember vaguely, what is it, the Arbutus Ridge, they have a maximum, don't they? It's like 240 or something. Like there are established guidelines on Bowen already in some zonings of maximums, right?
Yeah, the other example I was thinking of is on the community lands lot 1, area 2, the piece that's by Belterra, has a maximum of 140 square meters. And then it has what's called a maximum average of 115. Right. And so that was trying to say that the average size of I think it's 20 units would be 115, but some could be bigger and some would be smaller.
Yeah. I mean, I kind of like that. Certainly it's a starting point. Like, I think that's interesting. That's already been established in what's, hoping to be a more dense neighborhood, right? Zoning. So I don't know, again, just because we're just kind of picking numbers to suggest things. So it's, as a starting point, I feel like that's probably a good place to start. What do you
That's based on rezoning, right? This is based on spot zoning, on rezoning.
This is all based on rezoning. So, I think with these guidelines, although maybe ultimately the goal might be, in the long term to allow some things outright, I think the goal of this immediately, I don't see this being like available to all of the site. You know what I mean? Like Vancouver did, where they basically just went blanket, you can have duplex. I'm not suggesting that at all. I don't think that's palatable to Bowen. I don't think that's what we all want. I see this very much, these guidelines are very much about spot zoning. or pilot project, whatever we want to call it, like people would be coming in for rezoning. They would say, hey, we're following all of these cluster guidelines, guidelines. This is what hopefully maybe council endorses or however that ends up. There was this report and hey, we're going to propose this rezoning on this lot and we're going to follow these guidelines. So then hopefully they have some, they feel less risk in coming forward with that because council has, in principle, endorsed these or something like that. That's kind of my goal for it. I don't think at the moment it's a good idea to entertain, sort of like blanket allowing these in all the different residential zones. I don't think I think that maybe in the future, but I don't see that as being, something palatable in the short term. Yeah. So any more thoughts on, does anybody else, like Ron, Maureen, Daniel, do you have any other thoughts on, like any of these things, like if we should even, like what we should include or not? I had sort of thought maybe in terms of setbacks, maybe that's something to be considered on a case-by-case basis, whether you allow setbacks to be reduced, and then maybe that has to be in conjunction with the height being lowered, something like a little mix like that, so that people know, hey, if you want to take a lot and relax setbacks, you have to bring the height down, that kind of thing. So they at least have a guideline in that way in existing neighborhoods. I think it could be quite different in new neighborhoods.
Could I ask the cluster size, 3 to 8 units?
Yeah.
How did you land on that?
I just threw these numbers out there. Honestly, that's why they're in red. It was very much a, like, let's think about this. I just want them to be discussion points. So up in the, where we compared here, the only one, so Squamish, I think, had a minimum, which is interesting. You had to have 4 units and a maximum of 10. And I think Gibson's, the particular zoning had 6 per building. That was sort of a max, I think. So yeah, it's more of a question. Is there a minimum? Is there a maximum? I mean, obviously the whole point would be to at least make it 2. So maybe the minimum is 2.
If you do, Robyn, if you do spot zoning, right? And let's say let's say it's spot zoning in existing neighborhoods, and that is now zoned single family and it has a maximum square footage, then I think a good start is to say, well, you can use the same square footage. So therefore, it varies between lots. And at the moment, on Bowen Island, it's just set by side coverage, setbacks, height, right? But it would still be better if there would be floor space as well, because then it's all these numbers you can somehow implement. Without floor space regulations, you can't really do that. But if you would have a lot, and I think that square footage that's permitted on these lots is, generally speaking, fairly generous. And you just say, well, you can just divide that and you comply with the existing regulations. And if you would want the regulations to be varied, then you submit an application for that. But if it's spot zoning, I think that's fine. But you don't necessarily have to change the rules that much. I would just say you can do spot zoning for cluster zoning, and for now, it's a matter of calculating it. Like what we should probably just do is take a few examples and see how the numbers pan out if you leave the maximums the same as now.
So I think that's interesting. So we could just say recommend, per existing zoning, per existing, or neighborhood zoning. Maybe we could say neighborhood zoning, something like that. So I think that's valid. And then maybe we put a guideline. And again, I'd have to look at these numbers because I don't know these numbers off the top of my head, like density per hectare. And that's just a guideline. So if somebody is doing something new or it's whatever, that just to give them like, hey, this is a max, like.
That's more for subdivision, right? For large subdivisions.
I would think so, but it would give you a guideline. Like it's just the measurement of units per hectare is just the units, how you. Yeah.
I think the density automatically comes out of the maximum floor space that you can use. And then if you have an average in place, right, of 115 square meters or so, and you have a maximum, then guess what? It will unfold. You don't have to give it. The number will be a result of the lot size.
Yeah, okay. I think that I agree with you. That makes sense, because I was worried that somebody could take the existing guidelines and, create, 20, tiny hotel room, like, studio apartments or something. And I think that wouldn't necessarily be what we want to encourage, but you're right. If we actually take the minimum, maximum and average sizes, whatever those numbers end up being, that would take care of that variety. Am I right, Daniel? Like that would kind of translate through to a
I know, I'm
variety
sort
unit
of
sizes?
debating and looking examples. Like there's an area in Grafton Lake, their area 8 in their zoning, essentially zones for, it allows up to 12 units and they can all be on the same lot and there's a maximum size. And that
Okay.
area is like 1.2 hectares. So essentially it's saying like 10 per hectare or 0.1.
Okay.
And that's like an average, it's like quarter acre size. So it's actually less dense. Well,
Yeah, this
like
thing
the
would
lots
have
in
to-
Deep Bay are smaller than that. But I don't know
Mhm.
if you counted roads and stuff, how that would.
Right,
would work
right.
out,
So that
but-
so maybe this density isn't, like you say, isn't that helpful as a guideline. I don't know. Is that what you were thinking, Daniel? Sorry,
I don't know, because then I do wonder, yeah, should there be, something where we're saying, well, no, the goal is not to build, 50 square foot units, or I'd say like,
Yeah.
look, I can fit 30 of them within the building area of this house. And we're like, okay, well, there are impacts at a certain scale that are going to come into play. Like,
Yeah. We're sort of, because my idea is, and that's why I kind of liked the idea of a minimum and maximum. And again, it would probably have to vary, case by case basis, but yeah, it's not meant to be somebody developing like 30 units in an apartment building, or that's not what the goal of this is. So that's why, maybe one of the ones where they had a maximum of 10 units, that was kind of again, I'm not quite sure how to address that.
I think in existing neighborhoods, I think in existing neighborhoods, it's different. Like if you have a number of 8 and somebody suddenly says, oh, I'm going to get 8 units beside me, that's different than in a new neighborhood. So I think in existing neighborhoods, you would set the sizes higher, like the homes would be, the average would be a higher number, I think, because it's the impact. It's, suddenly there's more cars, there's more parking. And if you have 8 units suddenly beside you, then that's a big difference. So I'm just saying is that but I think that in the new neighborhoods where people love clustering, you could have much higher, you could have smaller averages, smaller units, smaller averages.
Okay. And 'cause I think you're right too, parking's a consideration and services.
Yeah.
And I think that those things actually might be limiting factors as well. Like you probably can't take a standard lot and build, 20 units on it because you simply wouldn't have the space for the servicing and parking and stuff like that. So, okay, maybe I think I want to move on because we're already running over the time I set for us. So maybe let's all kind of just consider these and we can take it offline at minimum and see what of these actually apply, which ones don't. And then if we want to include them, what do we want to recommend? I think that was, and then these issues for discussion. So I don't know, Daniel, in the end with guidelines, would these be useful to consider? Like kind of, these are things that should be addressed by applicants. Maybe it's those kinds of things, like issues to be addressed. Okay. That's maybe a better sort of heading, so that they would need to, I think we'll take that out because really we're talking about spot zoning. Okay. So why don't we move along and everybody can, I'll try to make some changes and amalgamate these 2 documents and send them out by email. And then if everybody can, make some comments and maybe, we can.
So
have
as
a
you
meeting in
said,
between.
Robyn, so this is specific for spot zoning in existing neighborhoods. That's what you're saying.
I'm not saying necessarily for new neighborhoods, but it's all about spot zoning. I don't think anything we're recommending is going to be some, blanket application across different zones. It's all about, we're making recommendations for spot zoning.
Well, as long as it's clear that there is a ton more potential available on community lands and areas outside the cove and new subdivisions. I think if we ignore that in this one, fine, but let's be clear, this is for spot zoning in existing neighborhoods.
No, okay, so sorry, maybe I'm misunderstanding. So recommendations for spot zoning and new developments. Is that kind of what we're, because I don't want to exclude that. I'm not wanting to make it exclusively about existing neighborhoods, but I want to make sure that's included. And it's not about,
I think it will be different enough. So maybe if let's say if it goes to council, right? And if, if Maureen is there and she says, look, we first want to have this separate as spot zoning in existing neighborhoods. I think people will understand that. And that's one thing to get approved. Then you can say there is a conservation development. That's another one. And it really pairs nicely with clustering, right? Okay, now you got your clustering into there, right? And then you look at areas like the community lands where clustering can take on a different form. So I think that it's almost like you don't want to confuse people. So in the end, you have to take a few steps, so to speak, and keep it simple. I think the reason why conservation development is separate is simply because it's a concept that a lot of people like, and it can be approved on its own merits by itself. And that would be the same for spot zoning. And then if the word cluster comes up, because I try to figure out what is actually what may be a definition for a cluster island-wide, right? Then you suddenly have to say, well, what are we trying to achieve with clustering island-wide? And it is more open-ended, it's more conceptual in its nature.
Yeah. Okay. No, I think that's good food for thought. So let's see how this let's see how this works once it kind of has a more final form, if it really is just applicable to existing neighborhoods, or if it's something that at this moment could carry through to new ones, or if that, like you say, is maybe that's sort of step 2, phase 2.
Yeah, maybe a few different things, and somehow people get involved and they start to understand. But the idea to put clustering as one thing island-wide that is understandable, that's quite a big task, I think.
Yeah, agreed. Okay, well, thanks everybody. I think that was a good discussion. I'm excited about where that's going. So hopefully at our next meeting we can have something that we can sort of vote on and recommend. So we were going to talk about the work plan. So maybe we could do that really quickly. It was more just like a check-in. That's what I wanted, because I think we had, I don't know, Steph, if you want to share your screen, or I can share my screen to show the.
I can show that I can't get into my servers right now for some reason.
Oh, okay. Why don't I'll just share my screen because I have it up.
Sorry.
Yeah, no, that's okay. So hopefully everyone can see that. So this was our, I think this was our work plan with our January. So we're now in June. So we've done the housing targets report. We gave our feedback on secondary suites, which is great. So we're really on number 4. And so I guess we just sort of bump everything. We're always so ambitious with what we can cover, right? So, so we just have to probably shift some dates and still look at that. We definitely still want to get somebody to come and talk about community land trust. And I did reach out and I haven't heard back from like an organization. So we'll just keep going on that, see if we can get somebody to come talk to us. Yeah, so why don't we'll just kind of shift everything down. So we're still on number 4 in sort of June, July, and then we can maybe at the next one, make our plan for the second half of the year. Maybe that's a good way to tackle it. Yeah, okay, so let's do that if there are no objections. So maybe Steph, if you can add that for it's good to make, I like when you make notes. So there's like next meeting and then make a little note of like, so we'll rejig the work plan for the second half of the year kind of thing.
So can we add another column? Yeah. For something having been completed.
Sure. Yeah, I think that's great. Yeah. Always good to what we've accomplished. That's great. Okay, so moving along, let me find my agenda here. So we'll go to 6.1, Ucluelet worker housing report update. Councillor Nicholson.
Yeah, and so we took the idea to council, and Natasha Chung prepared a report which council received at its last meeting. The upshot is that we won't be proceeding with a project of that sort this summer for a variety of reasons, including insufficient time, but also the uptake in Ucluelet ended up being very modest. From some initial interest and excitement, only 3 licenses or permits ended up being issued. Natasha's report is really worth reading. There's a lot of information about why things didn't work the way that they might have been anticipated. And what Ucluelet has done, though, is has moved to case-by-case consideration of temporary use permits. And at the moment, that's where Bowen Island also stands. So if someone were interested in using an RV for staff purposes this summer for longer than, how long is it, Daniel? Is it 60 days that you can use? Can you remind me? The land use permission?
Yeah, let me just check.
Yeah. There already is something in our land use bylaw that permits use of RVs for staff, as long as there's no money exchanging hands.
I guess I would just say with that, so where is it? 90 days.
90 days.
Non-paying visitors. I mean, I think in the past, our bylaw department, we've said if you're staying on somebody's property as part of your employment contract, that doesn't count as a non-paying visitor. Like if it's like, come work here, and as part of that, you can stay in this RV on someone's property, that's sort of part of your employment compensation. It's different than as a you're not really a non-paying visitor if you are a staff member housed in an RV as part of your employment.
Okay, but if you were a Bowen Islander who wanted to offer a spot to a person who had an RV and was
visiting,
employed,
yeah,
and you weren't paying for the space, then that's potential.
Yeah.
So in one of the things that Natasha did was she laid out a timeline if we wanted to introduce an actual program in the coming year, and the idea was referred to a council strategic planning session to see if there is direction from council to proceed with that. What I found interesting about the whole process was just a lot more discussion around how some of the tools that we already have could be used perhaps a little more creatively. So that's the update.
Great. Yeah, I watched the presentation to council as well. So yeah, I think the report's worth reading. And if you haven't, if you're interested, watching the presentation at the council meeting was really useful. Great. Okay. So
is there anything else, Daniel, that you think I should have mentioned?
No, I mean, I think I guess like item 6.3 on the agenda today is the staff housing survey.
Right.
And sort of the potential for that to play into, developing this program in the future.
Right.
Yeah, great. Okay, any questions from anybody? Ron, Fritz, any comments, questions? No? Okay, 6.2 staff update. Daniel.
I think just the update is that I have tonight at council the bylaw 581, which you saw, which is the changes to the detached secondary suite minimum lot size. And then the associated increase in floor area. And currently the bylaw would prohibit that short-term rental of a secondary suite, attached or detached. So my report is on the agenda and council will be discussing tonight.
Okay.
Yeah.
Great.
So tune in.
Yeah, good. Okay, thank you. And then 6.3, we just mentioned it, the Community Economic Development Committee has the staff housing survey out. Did you want to say anything else about that, Maureen?
Yeah, it's the CEDC picked up on the recommendation that was in our housing targets report and launched a survey. It went out to all businesses on Bowen. So we use the business list. It's been out for a week and a bit now, I believe, and closes on July the 8th. Last time I checked, there were about 50 responses. Steph, is there any update on that?
I haven't checked this morning, but that was it. And then it's gone out through the normal agenda channels, through the emails. But if any of you are in the circles of housing social media or people or STEM, like specifically businesses,
Mhm.
please share.
Yeah, so it is targeted to business owners who have employees on island. And it came about in part because of a conversation that Daniel and I had where we early on talking about the Ucluelet project and just trying to get a sense of how many people might actually be interested in some of the options that we were discussing at that point. So it's an effort to quantify a specific group, the business owners, their need. It's also an effort to do some assessment of the impact of housing availability for their staff, the impact that it has on their businesses. So there's a list of impacts from no impact at all to, you know, I'm totally burned out and I can't expand my business at all. There's a question regarding what the business owner has already done to help address a housing shortage for their staff. Anyway, you've got a link to the full survey in the agenda, and we'll see what the upshot of it is.
Yeah, great. Well, we look forward to seeing the results.
Great.
Great. Okay. And then is there any other new business? 7.1. I don't think, other than maybe I'll give a shameless plug. The Birch housing survey is also out, sadly at the exact same time as the worker housing, but that's all right. People are answering surveys. So, and they are, yours is a very targeted audience. Ours is much more broad. So yeah, so the Birch survey is open till, I feel like it's June 30th. I have to double check the date. So maybe I'll take your advice, Steph. I'll do a post myself on social media and list both of them, you know, the Birch general one and then the worker housing for businesses. I think that's useful. Any other new business from anybody?
The CMHC report that was distributed to us, I haven't had much time to really go through it, but one of the things that was mentioned to me is that the definition of affordability has changed. Does this ring a bell? What I was told, and I need to double check, is that it's no longer being defined as 30% of is it pre-tax income? It's being defined as 40% of post-tax income.
Oh, wow. That's a big shift. Okay, well, yeah, I mean, that'd be worth looking into. I haven't had a chance to also to go through the report, so it'd be interesting to see if that has shifted. That'll be, a big change.
Yeah, if that is the case, then that kind of has potential ripple effects through a number of projects that are underway.
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
and also housing agreements.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
Anyway.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
No, it's a good one. So yeah, that it'd be good to go through that report. Okay. Any other new business? No, we had a few information items, the island plan and the housing needs report. And look at that, we're actually finishing early, even with all of that various discussion. It's great. So yeah, if there is nothing else, we'll wrap up. And next meeting, that's the other thing that we want to do. I would like if we could get one more in July and then take August off. I think obviously, which is pretty much what we all do with all the municipal things. So if we could squeeze one in July, that would be great. Are there any particular dates that work or don't work for people? And I know we don't have Michael with us, but
July 25th, council has a strategic planning session all day. So
yeah, okay.
So that Monday's out.
Could we look at a different day of the week? I know Mondays typically work well for all of us, but I'm thinking just because it's July and there's a bunch of other stuff going on, I'm happy to be flexible. For me, it's just where it fits in my schedule. So Ron, you're reasonably flexible. Yeah. And Fritz?
Yeah.
Is there any?
Yeah, it's pretty open. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay.
What about Wednesday, the 27th? Oh.
Yeah. No.
I'm going to tour a sewer system.
What are you gonna do?
Sorry.
Oh dear.
Iona Island.
Okay. So yeah, maybe Steph, you give us times because obviously we have to, you know, it's your schedule. You have to be available as well. So maybe
Tuesday the 26th
I'm free all day.
at
Yeah.
9:30 a.m.
Yeah. So far good. Fritz?
Yeah.
So far? Yeah. All right. Done.
Okay, that's my birthday, so you better.
Aw,
So nice.
happy birthday. Okay. Excellent. So we'll see then, and we'll hopefully confirm with Silas if he can make that, and then if he can't, he'll have him back in the fall or something. It's not it just if we can get him to come talk to us this year, I think it'd be really interesting. So good. Okay. Well, I will officially. Oh, I forget the term. Bring the meeting to adjourn the meeting. That's the word I'm looking for. Adjourn the meeting. Whatever time it is. Thank you, everybody. Lovely to see you. Enjoy the sunny weather, and
Thank you.
we'll see you next month. Okay. Bye.
Bye-bye.